Busy day, right? I do not know why the president chose tonight to give an Oval Office version of the same speech he's been making against immigrants since 2015. But I do know what happened today in the news that the White House must be excited to try to push out of the headlines with that speech. All right. Do you remember the Trump Tower Moscow project? The president's longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen, pled guilty a few weeks ago to lying to Congress about the Trump Tower Moscow project. Now, in the course of those court proceedings about Michael Cohen, we learned that the president himself had repeatedly lied about that project to the public and had tried to keep it secret during the campaign, even though he and his organization were pursuing it during the campaign. Well, that tower, that would-be Trump Tower Moscow, now looms as a fairly serious issue, both for the scandal about Russia getting involved in the presidential election to benefit Trump, but it also looms over the prospect that the president may have been compromised by a foreign government even during the time that he has been president, right? After all, when Trump and the Trump Organization were working during the campaign to try to build Trump Tower Moscow, and they were working with the Russian government to try to get that deal done, the Russian government knew that those conversations and those negotiations were underway. They also knew that Trump was publicly lying about it and trying to keep it secret. That alone means that Russia had something on him. Something they could use to pressure him, something they could use to blackmail him. They could somehow use that as leverage over him, both during his campaign and during his time as president, during all of the time that they knew that secret about him that he, for some reason, didn't want let out. Well, here's one important brand new thing about that scandal. You'll recall that Trump Tower Moscow was reportedly supposed to be financed by a Russian bank that was under U.S. sanctions. It isn't as simple as it seems. Bottom line, presumably in order for Trump to get his Trump Tower Moscow deal, which we think would have been the biggest real estate deal of his life, U.S. sanctions against Russian entities, including that bank, would need to have been dropped or at least softened. That's what made it so interesting when we learned that the two guys from the Trump Organization who were working on Trump Tower Moscow, Felix Sater and Michael Cohen, they also got involved in an effort right after Trump was elected to concoct a new plan that would result in sanctions being dropped on Russia. It was dreamed up as a peace plan. Michael Cohen, Felix Sater were involved in that. This peace plan, its terms were ridiculous. The whole point of it was to drop sanctions on Russia. That, of course, would have had the effect of dropping sanctions on that bank that was slated to finance this gigantic real estate deal that they were working on for Trump, which was going to make them all hundreds of millions of dollars. So we'd known about that heading into today. Trump Tower Moscow thing, the president's lying about it. Trump Tower Moscow due to be financed by a Russian bank. The guys working on Trump Tower Moscow working on a plan to drop Russian sanctions. Today, we learned that the president's campaign chairman may have worked on that too. Paul Manafort had publicly denied in 2017 that he had anything to do with that supposed peace plan that would have resulted in the dropping of Russian sanctions. But today, Manafort's defense team filed this new document with federal court in D.C., in which they apparently didn't redact things properly. You can see from the filing there are a bunch of things that are behind black boxes. You're not supposed to be able to read those things. But they screwed up when they tried to redact this document. And if you, in fact, open it up on your computer, you can read what is behind those black boxes. Oops. And so because of that mistake, by accident, part of what we learned today in this Manafort court filing is that the president's campaign chair, Paul Manafort, he has told prosecutors from the special counsel's office that he did work on that plan to drop Russian sanctions. Or at least he worked on something that was called a Ukraine peace plan. The Felix Sater Michael Cohen plan apparently was this plan that took shape after Trump was elected. If that's the same plan Manafort has told prosecutors he was involved with, the timing of this thing is unusual, right? I mean, Manafort got fired from the campaign months before the election. Did they bring back the fired campaign chairman with links to Russia to do work on this effort to drop Russian sanctions, along with the guys from Trump's business who were trying to get the Trump Tower Moscow built? We don't know the details of it, but that revelation that Manafort was involved and that he has told prosecutors about this, that is new today. We also learned from that same document today, from the bad redactions in that document, that prosecutors believe Manafort shared polling data from the campaign with a business associate of his. A business associate of his who incidentally has been also indicted by Robert Mueller. He is also a person who's been described by the FBI in court documents as being associated and tied with Russian intelligence. We did not previously know that one of the things Manafort was accused of doing during the campaign was giving polling data from the campaign to a guy in Russian intelligence. But now we know that prosecutors allege that that's one of the things Paul Manafort did. So that accidentally unredacted court filing today, that was revelatory on a couple of different levels. It was also just one of a bunch of different developments in the Russia scandal today, and specifically in the legal jeopardy of people associated with the president and his campaign related to that scandal. Today, for example, this indictment was unsealed against Natalia Veselnitskaya, who was the lawyer who attended the Trump Tower meeting during the campaign with Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. That was the meeting they took purportedly to get dirt from the Russian government about Hillary Clinton. In today's indictment of Veselnitskaya, prosecutors in the Southern District of New York alleged that she lied to a federal court. She lied to a federal judge in a Russian money laundering case because she wanted to conceal the fact that she was effectively working on behalf of the Russian government. She entered into the record in that money laundering case something that she described as a Russian government independent investigation of the issue, when in fact it wasn't an independent investigation at all. In fact, she had helped the Russian government produce that document. Because she was working for the Russian government and trying to pretend like she was not, the court ultimately was able to ferret out that she lied to the court on that matter. She is charged with obstruction of justice now. And there's a whole bunch of intriguing questions about this indictment. I mean, number one, this alleged attempt by her to queer that case, to obstruct justice in that case, in that New York courtroom, prosecutors say that effort by her happened in November 2015. That's a long time ago. Why did they charge her now? Our own Richard Engel, in a special hour that he did for this show, he documented in detail this alleged obstruction of justice by Veselnitskaya that is spelled out in the indictment today. Richard Engel confronted Veselnitskaya about that in an interview. That was April of last year. Why was Veselnitskaya just indicted for it now? And actually, a further question. It looks like she was indicted for this obstruction of justice on December 20th. That indictment was filed under seal for some reason. And 19 days later, today, this indictment was unsealed, and we're all now allowed to see it. Why does that timing make sense, too? And then just as we were absorbing that news, we got further word today that the chairs of 7 major committees in Congress are now challenging Trump's Treasury Secretary over a Trump administration decision that was announced just before Congress to lift sanctions on companies associated with this man, Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska is an oligarch close to Vladimir Putin. He himself had an odd connection to Paul Manafort in the Trump campaign. This is the guy to whom Manafort offered private briefings during the campaign. Again, why was the president's campaign chair offering private briefings on the campaign to a Russian oligarch close to Vladimir Putin, who's now under U.S. sanctions? While, at the same time, he was apparently providing polling data about the campaign to a guy associated with Russian intelligence, who happens to have been his conduit to the Russian oligarch connected to Putin. Why did the Trump campaign at the highest levels have all these connections to the Kremlin? We don't know. But tonight, the New York Times, citing a single source, reports that when Manafort shared internal private polling data from the Trump campaign with that Russian intelligence guy, he asked that guy to pass that internal data on to Oleg Deripaska. And Donald Trump's Treasury Department announced just before Christmas that they want to relax sanctions on companies associated with that oligarch, Oleg Deripaska. And now today, these 7 Democratic committee chairs in the House of Representatives are demanding that the Trump administration explain that decision. They are demanding an immediate meeting with the Secretary of the Treasury, Steven Mnuchin, to explain why these sanctions are going away. Quote, "Dear Secretary Mnuchin, we write in response to a December 19th notification indicating that the Treasury Department intends to terminate sanctions on these 3 Russian companies as part of a deal with Oleg Deripaska, a Russian oligarch who has abetted the Putin regime's malign activity against the United States. Quote, as the chairs of committees with oversight jurisdiction over the U.S. response to Russia's attempts to interfere in our elections and other hostile actions, we have a number of concerns about the agreement that the U.S. has reached with Mr. Deripaska. The 7 committee chairmen are asking Treasury to delay the implementation of this relaxation of sanctions on Deripaska's companies. They're asking for a full explanation of how Treasury arrived at this decision, and they want a meeting between Steven Mnuchin and, quote, all interested members on this subject. And they want that meeting soon, before the sanctions are withdrawn. And again, the clock is ticking. Congress has 30 days to object to the lifting of these sanctions. The Trump administration announced just before Christmas that that clock had started ticking because they announced that they'd be lifted. And then, as we were absorbing that information, we got further word that the United States Supreme Court has weighed in for the first time today on an aspect of the Mueller investigation. This is about a case that remains shrouded in secrecy, but the Supreme Court today declined to intervene on behalf of an unknown corporation that's owned by an unknown foreign country that's been fighting a subpoena that we believe is from the special counsel's office. In a very short order today from the Supreme Court and a long and fascinating order from the D.C. Court of Appeals, we learned today almost nothing about the identity of this corporation or which country owns this corporation, but we do know as of today that at the highest levels of the U.S. judiciary, that foreign country and that foreign corporation, they're getting no help in their efforts to resist a subpoena about something that pertains to the special counsel's investigation. So this is today, right? Manafort was maybe working on dropping Russian sanctions, possibly along with the Trump Tower Moscow guys. Manafort was giving polling data, internal polling data from the campaign to a guy in Russian intelligence, who he was then asking to pass it on to a Russian oligarch close to Putin. The Russian lawyer from the Trump Tower meeting has been criminally indicted in the United States for lying about the fact that she represents the Russian government. The Democrats that just took over the House of Representatives are getting up on their hind legs and trying to stop the Trump administration from dropping sanctions on companies owned by the pro-Putin oligarch that Trump's campaign chair was trying to pay back during the Trump campaign somehow, and to whom Manafort was apparently funneling internal polling data from the campaign. And the Supreme Court is not going to help Country A and their unknown corporation, which is trying to resist the reach of U.S. law enforcement in the guise of the Mueller special counsel investigation. And now that corporation is in contempt of court and being charged $50,000 a day until they comply with Mueller's subpoena. Other than that, not much happened today, though. Wonder what tomorrow's going to be like.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.